Welcome to Module 4 of the course Plus Inclusive Education from Reflection to Action. In this module, we will focus on the following topics. What is an inclusive teacher? What is an inclusive learning environment? The teaching-learning process in an inclusive ecosystem. Is differentiation inclusive? Inclusive pedagogy, child-centered pedagogy. How to make the curriculum accessible to all, how special education teachers can contribute to paradigm shift. Similarly to Module 3, the objectives of this module are: know ways of developing quality inclusive education for all learners, identify ways to create an inclusive classroom, to adjust pedagogical-didactic practices that promote the potential of all students. The school of the 21st century is an increasingly demanding school where reflection emerges on the importance and need to include and make education more inclusive. Therefore, and according to UNESCO, inclusive schooling requires teachers to recognize the abilities of every student in the classroom, assuming that everyone's ability to learn is unlimited. It is important that during the learning process, the teacher is receptive to diversity. Thus, the need arises to prepare teachers for the diversity of students present in the school environment. In this sense, it was crucial to reflect on what the profile of an inclusive teacher is and what it entails. In view of this, as a result of the Teacher Training for Inclusion (TPL4I) project, headed by the European Agency for Development in Special Needs Education, referred to in Module 3 of this course, the profile of inclusive teachers emerged. This was developed taking into account a set of values associated with areas of competence that proved to be essential. A set of attitudes, knowledge, as well as skills that support such competencies were also highlighted. That being said, we highlight the following. First, appreciation of diversity. The difference felt in the school classroom context is seen as an advantage, a resource during the teaching and learning process. Associated with this value, we highlight the following capabilities. Reflect on attitudes and beliefs and their consequences for behavior, as well as use strategies that prepare teachers to change non-inclusive attitudes and to act in segregated situations. Teachers' views on diversity and the issues inherent in it. The attitude goes through viewing being different as something normal and respect and value diversity as something that adds value to schools, to have the ability to learn from difference. To this end, identifying the most appropriate strategies for diversity is essential to the process of valuing diversity. To promote the participation not only of parents but also of families during the learning process. Supporting all, teachers have high expectations of all their students. For this, it is necessary to develop skills such as effective verbal and nonverbal communication from teachers, ability to develop not only independence but also autonomy in students, to train students with the capacity to learn how to learn, among others. How? Through the application of effective teaching and learning methods in order to meet the demands of a heterogeneous school or classroom, namely, working with students both individually and in diverse groups, using the curriculum as a tool for access to learning and inclusion itself. 3. Working with others, that is, establishing collaboration with teachers and other educational professionals. Here we highlight working with the parents and families of pupils. This will require the development or enhancement of skills to involve parents and families in the learning process of their children, ability to communicate effectively with parents, and the work with other professionals in the field of education, which will involve practice peer teaching as well as working in flexible teaching teams, develop problem solving in conjunction with other professionals, have the ability to create partnerships with other educational establishments, etc. Finally, the professional and personal development of the teacher. Throughout their career and considering the demands associated with it, Teachers should proactively invest in seeking and improving learning in order to meet the needs of their students. Here, it is important that this professional development focuses on 1. A capacity for reflection on the part of the teacher through the improvement of skills. Continuous self-evaluation about teaching and learning among and with educational professionals, and contribution to the development of the school as a learning community. 2. Initial teacher education as a basis for continuous development, so teachers are expected to be proactive in using strategies to seek continuing education opportunities, in using colleagues and other professionals as sources of learning and inspiration, and in contributing to the learning and development process of the whole school community. We recommend that you consult the document referred to in your language for more in-depth information. In our Good Practice Guide, in addition to the skills that need to be developed, we also refer to the attitudes and knowledge that each of these aspects imply. What is an inclusive learning environment? For a school to have the capacity to include, to respond to all students so that no one is deprived of the right to education, some practical changes are needed in the school context, namely in the classroom. Changes that contribute to the development of an inclusive environment. What to include? The physical environment. From the arrangement of tables and chairs to the definition of specific areas associated with different activities, areas, or disciplines. For example, if the tables and chairs are arranged in a U shape, it prevents some students from having difficulty seeing, as well as facilitating the teacher's visibility, eye contact, and attention to the whole group. The definition of areas, besides those corresponding to knowledge areas, science, reading, may include as a good practice the definition of a self-regulation space. This should be considered as a physical resource of the classrooms that facilitates the well-being and predisposition to learning of children with and without specific needs. The psychosocial environment is also part of an inclusive environment. Ensuring emotional, physical, and social well-being involves ensuring safety and security, health, joy and warmth between educators and students and among the students themselves. Note that protection means freedom from all forms of physical, emotional, and social threats, abuse, exploitation, and violence. Learners, teachers, and other educational staff should be informed and protected from the dangers that exist in and around the learning environment. The activities used to ensure students' well-being seek to emphasize their cognitive development, sound social interactions, and ensuring their health. These activities encourage students' participation in decisions that affect them. By participating in problem-solving, decision-making, and risk reduction, children and young people can feel more useful and contribute directly to their well-being. To achieve this, teachers need support in managing the classroom positively. This means ensuring that the learning environment promotes mutual understanding, peace, and tolerance, and provides the skills to prevent violence and conflict. Positive reinforcement and the sound system of discipline form the basis for establishing such an environment and replace corporal punishment, verbal abuse, humiliating situations, and bullying. Bullying includes mental stress, violence, abuse, and discrimination. These points should be included in the teacher's code of conduct and discussed systematically in teacher training and supervision activities. Interinstitutional network for education in emergencies. At this point, the student's self-esteem can be worked on through group activities, namely participation in group games, where their performance is recognized and valued, not only by the teacher but also by their peers. Practical examples facilitating an inclusive environment. To have space to exhibit work. Have a learning corner for maths and science or experiences. Also have a storytelling language area, which may include a small library exclusive to the room. Have more than one blackboard. Have class committees established to organize learning materials rather than the typical class leader. Have books or other materials made by students. In addition to creating an inclusive learning environment, it is critical to openly address the issue of diversity and inclusion. Many teachers limit themselves to teaching curriculum topics, but it is crucial to talk to students about other topics, such as the issues of difference, exclusion, and inclusion, as well as possible solutions to remove barriers to inclusive education. This kind of action motivates students' participation and empowers them. These are topics to be worked on in a transversal and continuous way, so it is necessary to create a specific moment in the school year. Having an inclusive day at school may be a start, but it is not the way. The game is available only in 3 languages, Portuguese, English, and Spanish, in PDF format and can be printed directly by whoever is going to use it. It includes, in practice, 4 different games, 4 different dynamics and approaches, which use the cards provided as their basis. Simple dynamics were favored, taking into account the target audience, preschool, first, and second cycles. In pedagogical terms, the dynamics cover 4 different approaches to good and bad practices: identify, create, relate, and reflect. The advantages are the approach to the topic through different angles. In a class, children can be divided into small groups, playing different games. The games have different levels of difficulty, which broadens their application. The 4 modes of play are: Game 1. Identify good and bad practices. A game to identify good and bad practices and reflect on their meaning. Aim to identify good and bad practices in the school and explain why they were chosen. Game 2. Creating good and bad practice situations. A game to create situations of good and bad practice. Aim. Create a situation and reflect on which is the good and bad practice to establish in that place, given the cards you have drawn. Game 3. Relate good and bad practices. Memory game. A game to relate good and bad practices and which simultaneously appeals to the ability to memorize. Aim. To relate good and bad practice with direct relationship between good and bad practice. Game 4. Reflecting on good and bad practices. A game focused on promoting reflection on good and bad practices. Aim. To reflect on what are good and bad practices. There are 3 types of cards. Characters cards. Each card represents a character, adult or child, who may be involved in everyday situations at school. Situations cards. They represent past situations at school related to inclusion, taking into account learning issues, social relationships, accessibility, among others. Each situation is represented in 2 ways, one in which the result is negative and one in which the result is positive. Local letters. Each card represents a location in the school. There are 7 cards with different locations. Happy and unhappy letters. Each card has a happy or unhappy emoji to categorize how we feel about a particular practice. All games require adult moderation. This is a game to raise awareness and sensitivity among adults and children. It is not yet 100% inclusive, but we believe that one day it will be possible to adapt it for all children with and without disabilities. Go to the project website to download the game and use it. Your feedback is welcome. So in the description of this video, we have provided the official email address of the project for you and your students to send your opinion. Promote interaction between students. In an inclusive school environment, it is important to foster initiatives that invite students to discuss issues and ideas among themselves. These initiatives help to break down barriers, thus facilitating friendships between students. In this way, they can find things in common with other children and start to relate to each other. In addition to resources such as those suggested above, social and emotional skills programs are invitations for teachers to have prepared some activities that they can easily integrate into their daily classroom routine. It is important that these practices are seen as an investment by the teacher rather than being considered just another activity in a plan. Also, encouraging group work. The organization of group work is another way of promoting inclusion, as children have the opportunity to share their difficulties and potential in a group, which helps them to better understand the content taught, allowing interaction between students. The work in groups and the use of peer tutoring have already been proven in practice and scientifically validated. In this way, the teacher allows children to promote self-organization of the classroom environment and, at the same time, encourages solidarity, negotiation, and sharing. Communication and correct use of terminology. Assertive and positive communication, using correct terminology, is key to interacting with people, so it is important to observe how children communicate with each other, as well as how the teacher addresses them. For example, we should not use the terminology children with special needs. We should replace it with the term pupils with specific educational needs. To see and reflect on other similar examples, we recommend that you consult our Good Practice Guide, Module 2, Chapter 2.1.1, Person with Disabilities or Disabled Person. Tools such as nonviolent communication should also be part of an inclusive school and should be known by all those who live in it. Besides thinking what one says, one must do it in an assertive way, without judgments and negative connotations. Practicing it during classes would be revolutionary and the promoter of the most challenging change in inclusion, the change of attitudes. Enabling learners to lead. Allowing students to take over educational activities in the classroom in this way will allow them to stand out and make themselves known to each other, thus facilitating the inclusion process. Leadership in children and adolescents makes them more active and creative problem-solving subjects. The skills associated with leadership allow the development of a sense of responsibility as well as the ability to work and collaborate in a team. These are just a few aspects to consider in an inclusive educational environment. You will find this topic further developed in the Good Practice Plus Inclusive Education Handbook. Bottom line, an inclusive classroom environment means putting into practice a set of values and attitudes, both on the part of teachers and the rest of the school community. An inclusive school environment includes all children, regardless of their cultural and linguistic background, their physical condition, whether or not they have learning difficulties. It is a space where difference is celebrated and the participation and collaboration of everyone in the classroom is positively promoted. The teaching-learning process in an inclusive ecosystem. Is differentiation inclusive? Classrooms are increasingly a heterogeneous space where students with different needs, looks, and abilities intersect. It is therefore a rich space that facilitates and enriches the sharing and acquisition of knowledge. However, all this diversity entails constant challenges, resulting from the individual needs and interests of each student. That may condition the teaching and learning processes to some extent. In view of this heterogeneity, it is essential to take into account the individual differences of all in the classroom context, in order to promote their full development through pedagogical differentiation. That is, the application of didactic measures which aim at adapting the teaching-learning process to the important inter- and intra-individual differences of the pupils in order to allow each pupil to reach his maximum in achieving the didactic objectives. Here, we highlight the diversification and differentiation of pedagogical methods, as well as the flexibility of curricula. The difference between the students present in a classroom context stem from several factors, namely cognitive characteristics, physical characteristics, gender differences, ways of acquiring knowledge and learning, language, characteristics derived from risk situations, among others. In view of the factors mentioned above, the inclusive teacher should be aware of these, as well as of the idea that each learner learns differently. He or she should be aware of the need to know the origins of the diversity of students present in the classroom so that he or she can provide the most appropriate responses to their teaching needs and objectives. However, knowledge is not enough. It is essential that the teacher adopt some behaviors in order to create differentiated responses. Adaptations and flexibility at the level of the curriculum. Aim to promote gradual changes in curriculum management practices in primary schools in order to improve the effectiveness of the educational response to the problems arising from the diversity of school contexts. The flexibility of the curriculum will respond to each case, avoiding predefined contents and strategies, enabling adaptations of content to the learning style and pace of each student. Differentiated teaching strategies according to students' needs. It presupposes the individualization of the student's learning processes and involves, above all, the selection of teaching methods appropriate to the needs of the student so that he or she can achieve his or her maximum potential. This requires a great capacity on the part of the teacher to put into practice diversified activities, methods, and teaching strategies which require specific forms of organization of space, time, and resources. The idea of differentiated teaching relates to the premise that teaching methodologies should vary according to the characteristics, interests, and needs of the student, where the objective is the success or achievement of the subject. This could be achieved through a more individualized approach. In order to provide differentiated teaching, the teacher should consider a number of factors, namely, students' learning history, knowledge acquired by the student up to that point, interests, motivation, skills acquired so far. Once this information is acquired, the teacher should adapt their teaching strategies and methodologies in order to provide appropriate responses to the real needs of the student. This is essential for the student to achieve the desired educational success. Educational support. Providing differentiated responses is reflected, for example, in activities, teaching materials, and ways of assessing the learning. Pedagogical differentiation, then, involves understanding each situation and acting strategically in the face of it, taking into account the achievement of each student through the constant search for flexible paths, feasible tasks according to the learning rhythms of each one. Pedagogical differentiation is an inclusive practice implying accepting that diversity is a resource with which we improve our educational practice and having a different look about the richness that teaching the student who is outside the norm offers us. Firstly, it needs to be recognized that inclusive pedagogy should not be a lonely journey for teachers. According to the Index for Inclusion, each school should be encouraged to engage with another school or more in order to keep the flame of change alive and to add new issues for discussion. The path of inclusive pedagogy presupposes that education professionals continuously and proactively aim to deepen their knowledge in the field of inclusive pedagogy, analyze and reflect on their conceptions, attitudes, and practices, design and create innovative educational environments that ensure access, participation, and success for all children and students. To this end, the watchword is to collaborate and develop or enhance action research skills in order to equate innovation and change processes that facilitate inclusive pedagogy. It can therefore be concluded that inclusive pedagogy is a child-centered pedagogy that enables teachers to meet the learning needs of all children, including children with disabilities. Key elements of child-centered pedagogy include creating meaningful learning opportunities, considering multiple learning pathways, establishing joint learning, creating attractive learning environments, and using continuous assessment procedures. How to make the curriculum accessible to all. The concept of education for all questions the way of teaching in a large proportion of schools. Teachers often maintain the methodologies learned in their own schools. According to the 2005 EFA report, one way to adopt a set of relevant and balanced objectives is to analyze the curriculum in terms of inclusion. Accessible and flexible curricula can serve as the key to creating schools for all. It is important that the curriculum is flexible enough to allow for the possibility of adaptation to individual needs and to encourage teachers to seek solutions that suit the needs and abilities of each and every learner. Many curricula want all students to learn the same things, at the same time and using the same means and methods. But students are different and have different abilities and difficulties. Therefore, the curriculum should take into consideration the various needs of students in order to ensure success for all. Some of the possible strategies are: provide a flexible time frame for students to study certain subjects, give teachers greater freedom to choose their working methods, provide teachers with the opportunity to give special support in practical subjects, for example, orientation and mobility, in addition to the periods reserved for more traditional subjects. Set aside time for additional support for classroom work, emphasizing aspects linked to pre-vocational training. Together with flexible curricula, flexible teaching learning methodologies should also be adopted. For all this to become a reality, further changes in education policy are needed, including a shift from long, theoretical teacher training with no practical component to in-service and continuous training. Schools often need to be helped to change themes and working methods, and according to UNESCO, this should be a part of specialist training. The role of leadership in creating inclusive environments. In a simple way, the concept of leadership is related to the idea of motivation, ability, and capacity to guide someone according to the established objectives. It is a competence that requires communication and always implies not only a relationship, but also interdependence between subjects. Leadership in school organizations is complex, as there is a tension between complying with legal regulations, the demands of innovation in teaching, and the demand for results. Therefore, in addition to emotional competences, a leader must be able to act with emotion and be able to build a relationship of trust with all the members of the organization he or she leads. In an inclusive school, leadership is seen as collective, that is, the work is shared between the following actors: directors, pedagogical coordinators, support staff, specialized support services, members of the educational councils. Despite the autonomy granted to school leaders in implementing the strategy to achieve quality inclusive education, inclusive school leadership is not independent from the policies that concern it. Furthermore, the leadership of a school encompasses not only leadership processes, but also the management of the school itself, so it is crucial to find the right balance between managing and leading, as they are distinct. That is, leadership focuses on values, vision, and the future, while management is concerned with making the present work. Leadership assumes the following roles: to guide teachers, students, parents, and the rest of the educational community so that the objectives are successfully achieved in the future, monitoring of teaching processes, evaluation of teaching, apply legislation and policies in practice with the aim of developing quality and effective inclusive education practices, and develop a sense of community within the school. In the handbook Plus Inclusive Education, you will find a comprehensive description of some of the core functions of school leadership, as well as the 3 models of inclusive school leadership: educational, well-being leadership, transformative leadership, and delegated leadership. In summary, we can say that inclusive school leadership focuses on the implementation and development of an inclusive school culture where everyone works to not only value diversity, but also to ensure the right of everyone to receive a quality education, where the educational needs, interests, and goals of each individual find appropriate responses from the school. It is true that diversity is increasingly present in classrooms, and therefore, a set of strategies is essential to enable the development of an inclusive school capable of providing adequate responses to the needs and interests of each and every person. Hopefully, in this module, we have given you some clues leading to this much desired development. This brings us to the end of another module, and in order for you to reflect on what you have learned, we invite you to make a written reflection around these 2 questions. 1. Do we ensure that the curriculum and assessment process is adapted and responsive to the needs of all students? How? 2. Do we encourage and support innovative and flexible pedagogy and practice that serves a diverse group of learners and is based on well-founded decisions? How? Once again, we recommend that you consult this module of the Plus Inclusive Education Handbook. Under additional resources, you will find a series of practical handouts that will enable you to take action and make a diagnosis about your school. We hope this theme has inspired you. To conclude, we ask you to rate it on the link provided in the description of this video.